This is Mission Control Houston. We are now receiving live video of the Soyuz TMA-03M spacecraft. It is descending elegantly under its chute. Everything is on track. The weather down at the landing site, mostly sunny skies, temperatures in the low 80s, light winds out of the north, now descending into a cloud bank. At the time that the final series of helicopters left Karaganda about 2 hours ago to begin moving toward the landing site, there was some light rain in the Karaganda area, but that's well to the northeast of the landing site. You can see that the weather at the landing site or in the close proximity of the landing site is good. Landing is scheduled just 10 minutes from now. We now, of course, are watching live video courtesy of Roscosmos, the Russian Federal Space Agency, of the final minutes of the descent of the Soyuz TMA-03M spacecraft after 193 days in space.
Station Houston on 1, no response required. We know you don't have KU, just wanted to give you an update. 29S is under shoot now, and we're watching them. Everything looks good.
Drifting down to its landing site, Oleg Kononenko, Don Pettit, Andrei Kuipers under a fully deployed main chute. Time to touch down about 9 minutes. A dozen Russian Mi-8 helicopters with Russian Search and Recovery Force personnel, RSC Energia technical specialists, NASA support personnel, and European Space Agency support personnel now flying in that racetrack pattern that we talked about earlier around the prime landing site. So far, so good. It looks like the Soyuz vehicle is headed for an on-target bullseye landing. Everything continuing to look in great shape with the Soyuz vehicle. Once again, you're watching its descent under its main parachute toward its landing target just to the southeast of the town of Zhezkazgan in southeast Kazakhstan. The undocking of the Soyuz from the International Space Station's Rassvet module occurred on time just before 11:48 p.m. Central Time on Saturday night. The Soyuz conducted 2 separation burns to move to a distance of 12 kilometers away from the station, at which point at 2:19 a.m., just under an hour ago, the Soyuz engines fired for 4 minutes and 15 seconds in a deorbit burn, a deceleration retrograde maneuver to begin the trip back home into the Earth's atmosphere. The 3 sections of the Soyuz vehicle separated perfectly at 2:47 a.m. Central Time, followed by the deployment of the chutes 15 minutes later, setting the stage for what you're watching as the Soyuz descends under mostly clear skies to a landing site in a very desolate area of southeast Kazakhstan. Search and recovery forces are flying overhead, accompanied by 2 Antonov fixed-wing aircraft that are relaying data and telemetry from the Soyuz spacecraft back to the flight control team at the Russian Mission Control Center outside of Moscow. On a Sunday afternoon in southeast Kazakhstan, the view of the Soyuz TMA-03M spacecraft continuing to drift gently back toward Earth, now just 4 minutes away from its scheduled touchdown, its main chute having been deployed on time a few minutes ago. All of the Soyuz systems in good shape. We are not hearing communications at the moment from the crew, but the search and recovery forces will be in contact with the crew momentarily and are continuing to relay updates to the Russian flight control team at the Russian Mission Control Center.
Переконфигурацию связи можно начинать вовремя, да, ребята? Минуту. Как там дела у экипажа идут?
Под куполом наблюдаем вот по телевидению.
Отлично.
Continuing to receive stunning views of the final minutes of the flight of the Soyuz TMA-03M and the Expedition 31 crew, Oleg Kononenko, Don Pettit, Andrei Kuipers, as they gently descend this last couple of minutes or so back to their landing site. Search and recovery personnel are all in place, hovering around the prime landing site, flying in a circular pattern, just waiting for that capsule to touch down, at which point the Russian Mi-8 helicopters will begin to land in sequential fashion near the spacecraft.
Proceed in 2 minutes.
We're about a minute and a half away from touchdown. Everything continuing to look good. Radio beacon signals from the Soyuz being picked up by the Antonov fixed-wing aircraft. We haven't had any voice communication from the crew recently, but all reports prior to that showed an excellent descent, everything nominal, all Soyuz vehicle functions in great shape. Should be approaching touchdown. With any luck at all, we may be able to see the soft landing engines fire just a second before touchdown itself. And you can see one of those search and recovery helicopters. Once again, that helicopter part of a dozen such Russian Mi-8 helicopters. Touchdown, 3:14 and 48 seconds a.m. Central Time. You saw the soft landing engines fire just a split second before the Soyuz hit the ground southeast of Zhezkazgan, a bullseye touchdown. Landing once again at 3:14 and 48 seconds Central Time, 2:14 and 48 seconds p.m. at the landing site in Kazakhstan. The Expedition 31 crew, Oleg Kononenko, Don Pettit, Andrei Kuipers, home after 193 days in space. And as you can see from this video, courtesy of Roscosmos, some of the initial vehicles, part of the search and recovery forces, are already making their way toward the spacecraft. They will secure the chute so the vehicle is not dragged along due to any wind conditions at the surface. The helicopters will begin landing in sequential fashion to begin to make their way towards the spacecraft and begin the process of extracting the crew.
So Moscow base, Soyuz 1.
Moscow Station, Space to Ground 1.
Отвечаем.
Go ahead.
That very first helicopter that you see landing contains RSC Energia personnel, technical specialists who will tend to the safing of the Soyuz vehicle and will begin the process of erecting an inflatable medical tent nearby, which the crew members will be brought into in reclining chairs after they've had an opportunity to adapt to Earth's gravity for a few minutes.
On cover 1 mode activation. On IMPO. Say again. Oh, cover 1 is on IMPO. Oh, excellent. Copy. Copy all.
You're looking at the front screen of the Russian Mission Control Center. In the center screen, the Russian words for they've landed. The landing of the Soyuz TMA-03M spacecraft occurring right on schedule and right on the mark at 3:14 and 48 seconds a.m. Central Time, 2:14 and 48 seconds p.m. at the landing site. You saw the descent almost from the time of chute opening all the way through cloud layers onto a sun-bathed landing site in southeast Kazakhstan. Search and recovery forces now moving toward the vehicle itself to begin the process of safing the Soyuz and the extraction of the crew. This is Mission Control Houston. To recap, we were a captive audience to live television of the Soyuz TMA-03M vehicle descending under its main parachute for a touchdown that occurred on time and on target at 3:14 and 48 seconds a.m. Central Time about 7 minutes ago. That capped off a flawless night of activities that began with the farewells and the hatch closure in the mid-evening on Saturday night. All of the leak checks and preparations for undocking went without a hitch. The undocking itself occurring over China at 11:47 and 50 seconds p.m. Central Time on Saturday night, just before 1 a.m. Central Time, Eastern Time on Sunday morning. The Soyuz vehicle unlatched itself from the Rassvet module that it had been attached to since December 23rd, following the launch of the Petit, Kononenko, and Kuiper's crew from the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan 2 days earlier. The undocking was followed by a quick test of the Soyuz digital autopilot system, an engineering analysis test that had been scheduled and pre-planned. That enabled the Soyuz to begin backing away and phasing away from the International Space Station over a period of 2 orbits before the deorbit burn of the Soyuz engines at 2:19 a.m. Central Time that enabled the Soyuz to drop out of orbit for its descent back into the Earth's atmosphere. The 3 sections of the Soyuz separated pyrotechnically from one another 28 minutes after the deorbit burn. That was followed a few minutes later by the deployment of the parachutes and a flawless descent on a Sunday afternoon for a landing in southeast Kazakhstan, about 145 kilometers just to the southeast of the town of Zhezkazgan. So at this point, as the Rosaviatsia search and recovery forces make their way in their helicopters and all-terrain vehicles to the spacecraft. Again, the helicopters, several of them already on the ground, others in the process of descending for a landing in a circular pattern around the spacecraft itself. We will be standing by for additional television from the landing site, hopefully with the extraction of the crew from the spacecraft. They will be placed in individual reclining, comfortable chaise lounge type chairs to have an opportunity to begin to readapt to Earth's gravity for the first time in 6.5 months before they are carried in those chairs into that inflatable medical tent nearby to get out of their Russian Sokol launch and entry suits. And there we have now television from the landing site. And you can see that the Soyuz vehicle landed in an upright position. Depending on the conditions out at the landing site and the wind, sometimes the spacecraft will land and bounce or be dragged off onto its side. In this case, you can see that the Soyuz landed upright. What this means is the extraction hatch is at the top of the spacecraft. A small ladder will be erected alongside of the spacecraft, and the crew then will be pulled out of that top hatch one by one in order to make their way down the ladder and into the chairs that will be set up a short time from now. See on the right side of your screen, RSC Energia personnel beginning to bring that extraction ladder to the side of the Soyuz spacecraft, which landed upright, with touchdown occurring just 12 minutes ago. You can see the rapidity with which the search and recovery forces attend to the spacecraft. That, of course, aided by what was a bullseye landing for the Soyuz vehicle, bringing Oleg Kononenko, Don Pettit, and Andrei Kuipers back to Earth after 193 days in space, 191 days on board the International Space Station. Back up on the station, 250 miles overhead, the newly comprised Expedition 32 crew, the new commander, Gennady Padalka, the first three-time station commander, along with NASA flight engineer Joe Akaba and Russian flight engineer Sergei Revin, will be going to bed a short time from now for an extended sleep period. Sunday and Monday will both be off-duty days for the crew on board the International Space Station before they resume their normal complement of activities, including scientific research, on Tuesday. Once again, this ladder device is placed around the Soyuz capsule for landings that occur when the vehicle lands upright. It facilitates the extraction of the crew out of the top hatch. First out of the vehicle will be the commander, Oleg Kononenko. If form holds, Don Pettit would be second to be extracted out of the right seat, and the board engineer, Andrei Kuipers, from the European Space Agency, in the left seat for today's entry and landing, would be last out of the vehicle. And once again, in stark contrast to the weather conditions that Kononenko, Kuipers, and Pettit left the planet on back on December 21st, minus 22 degrees Fahrenheit from the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan, which is to the southwest of where this spacecraft currently is sitting. It is in the low 80s, a short sleeve environment for the search and recovery forces. The personnel in the blue suits are NASA support personnel. You just saw Dan Hartman from the International Space Station Program Office representing the ISS program at the landing site. And RSC Energia personnel now at the top of the extraction table with the ladders to begin the process of opening up the hatch, the precursor to the extraction of the crew.
Я отсюда буду стоять вот так вот на них, туда кресло, чтобы здесь вообще никого не было. Уйдем. Сережа,
Just after 2:30 p.m. at the landing site on a Sunday afternoon in Kazakhstan, as search and recovery personnel and Russian technicians begin to work toward the extraction of the crew. The Soyuz landing just about 18 minutes ago. Within seconds after touchdown, Russian Mi-8 helicopters carrying the support personnel began to land in sequential fashion near the spacecraft to expedite their extraction. They'll be placed in comfortable chairs, reclining chairs, to have an opportunity to get their sea legs or land legs back, as the case may be, so that they can begin their adaptation back to a gravity environment before they're brought into a medical tent nearby that has been inflated and erected. That medical tent is where the crew will get out of their Russian Sokol launch and entry suits and get into more comfortable clothing before they are flown back by helicopter. Each crew member has his own helicopter to fly back 2 hours to the city of Karaganda, which was the staging city for this landing today. There they will be greeted by a traditional Kazakh welcoming ceremony. Pettit and Kuipers will board a NASA plane to begin the long flight back to Houston, while Oleg Kononenko boards a Gagarin Cosmonaut Training Center plane to fly back to Chkalovsky Airfield outside of Star City, his training base.
Помоги, Денис, шнур.
And you can see, although somewhat obscured by the horde of people around the spacecraft, Oleg Kononenko, the Soyuz commander, is now out of the top hatch. His extraction coming in very, very swift fashion. Just about 20 minutes after the touchdown, there is Kononenko placed in the center seat. He will be flanked by Pettit and Kuipers as soon as they are extracted. The removal of the crew members from the Soyuz vehicle is always expedited if the vehicle lands upright, as was the case today.
Moscow Station and Space to Ground 1.
Отвечаем.
Go ahead. How's the crew doing? Have they extracted them from the capsule? Are you getting the imagery? So far, they only got Oleg. Say again.
Пока только Олег.
So far, they only got Oleg out. Oleg, okay. Well, what's the schedule going to be like for us from now on?
Ну, по дальнейшему я тогда выйду как.
Well, as soon as they've extracted everybody from the descent module, I'll give you a call, and then we'll revisit our timeline. Okay.
Все хорошо, до
Я так
связи.
понимаю, мы до утра непрерывно спать не будем.
But I figure we won't be able to really go to sleep until morning comes, so I'll call you later in the day, and then I'll get you all the data on pressure gauge readings and so on and so forth. Correct. All right, we'll stand by.
Soyuz Commander Oleg Kononenko waving as he's being attended to by his complement of Russian flight surgeon and nurse personnel. Everything continuing to proceed on track. The next crew member who should be extracted should be Don Pettit out of the right seat of the Soyuz vehicle. And as you heard in that space-to-ground communication with the Russian Mission Control Center, the new station commander, Expedition 32 Commander Gennady Padalka, inquiring about how the crew is doing, and was informed that Kononenko is out and that the rest of the extraction process is in work. Continuing to receive live television from the landing site in southeast Kazakhstan. Oleg Kononenko, the Soyuz commander, was extracted from the center seat of the Soyuz, which landed upright at 3:14 a.m. Central Time, 2:14 p.m. Kazakhstan time, about 24 minutes ago. The recovery process continues in good order. The Soyuz spacecraft's systems have been safed by RSC Energia personnel. Once all 3 crew members are out, they'll have a few minutes for a photo opportunity and once again to get their land legs back a bit as they adapt to the sensation of Earth's gravity for the first time in 6.5 months. They'll be brought into a nearby inflated medical tent to have their Sokol launch and entry suits removed. They'll slip into more comfortable clothing. And if the timeline goes as it usually does at the landing site, about an hour and a half from now, they should be wheels up in their respective helicopters for a 2-hour flight back to the staging city of Karaganda, which is about 450 kilometers to the northeast of the landing site that you're looking at right now.
Кто не задействовал, встаньте ближе к этой. Веревочки, да, чтобы не толкались. Ну прям вдоль веревочки станьте, вдоль ниточки станьте, за спрей.
This view at the landing site in the white shirt is Alexei Krasnov, who is the head of piloted programs, basically the head of human spaceflight for the Russian Federal Space Agency. On hand to witness firsthand the landing of the Soyuz vehicle, the extraction of the crew, and the whole process of the search and recovery of returning crew members from the International Space Station.
Повтори, не понял, кто когда.
And European Space Agency flight engineer Andrei Kuipers now out of the Soyuz vehicle, so they reversed order of what is normally the extraction process of the crew. Kuipers being helped down that slide and will be carried now to that reclining chair. Kuipers back on Earth, his second flight in the books, 204 days in space on 2 missions for Andrei Kuipers. Kononenko, that you see on the left-hand side of your screen, now has completed 392 days in space on his 2 flights. Kononenko flew 4 years ago as part of Expedition 17 and now is tied for 14th place on the all-time list for space endurance. And there at the landing site is the head of the Russian Federal Space Agency, Vladimir Popovkin, who flew on one of the Russian Mi-8 helicopters to the landing site to see how the landing operations occur up close and personal. And last but not least, Don Pettit, NASA flight engineer, who has just completed his second landing in a Soyuz vehicle and his third flight. Pettit wrapping up 370 days in space, now fourth on the all-time list of U.S. astronauts, behind Mike Fink, Peggy Whitson, and Mike Foale.
Might need your barf bag.
Andrea, wait please. Andrea, it's good, yeah. Yeah, thank you.
Давай, на меня звук, в принципе, тоже можно.
Второй раз.
Andrew, wait. Andrew. Thank you.
Once again, you're watching video from the landing site in southeast Kazakhstan, where the Soyuz TMA-03M spacecraft touched down about 34 minutes ago, right on time and right on target, 3:14 a.m. Central Time, 2:14 p.m. at the landing site in Kazakhstan. All three crew members have been extracted from the spacecraft. They are in respective chairs to have a few minutes to relax and begin the adaptation back to a gravity environment. Andrei Kuiper's there on the right, Oleg Kononenko in the center of your screen.
МКС Суба Москвы в канале СГ-1.
Station Moscow, space to ground 1. Go ahead, Moscow.
Геннадий, ну все.
Gennady, well, everybody's been extracted from the descent module.
На земле все нормально.
Everybody's down on the ground. Everything's normal. Well, excellent then. Good to hear. Another mission completed.
Да, да, очень радостно, очень приятно.
Well, in that case, we're going to go off and get some rest.
Все, давайте, ребята, отдыхайте.
All right,
Ну, там,
you guys get some rest.
как, как захотите, по
It's up to you, really.
усмотрению.
You know, it's on your discretion. Whenever you want to give us a call towards the evening. Yeah, we're going to give you a call towards the evening, get you the pressure gauge reading and so on and so forth.
Хорошо, до связи.
We'll do. Sounds good. Talk to you later.
With the landing of this Soyuz crew, life continues on board the International Space Station. You just saw the, as you're watching Andrei Kuipers at the landing site, Oleg Kononenko next to him. Don Pettit also has been extracted. He is in the reclining chair next to Kononenko on the other side. The new commander of the International Space Station, Gennady Padalka. Padalka calling down to Russian mission control and asking how the crew is doing. Flight controllers say they're doing just fine. And Padalka saying we're going to go about our business now, that business being an extended sleep period on board the International Space Station and an off-duty day on Sunday once they are awakened later today. Part of the post-landing operations include an opportunity for some photos to be taken around the crew members before they are lifted. And there we go, the first crew member, Soyuz Commander Oleg Kononenko, lifted. Now Andrei Kuipers, as they are being brought now into the inflatable medical tent nearby, where they will have their Russian Sokol launch and entry suits removed. They'll be placed into more comfortable clothing, as will Don Pettit, of course, and be prepared for a 2-hour helicopter flight back to the staging city of Karaganda, where the Russian Mi-8 helicopters departed from earlier today. to begin to fan out in sequential fashion in and around the landing zone, awaiting for the arrival of the Soyuz spacecraft. And Don Pettit also being attended to as he is being carried into that medical tent. All three crew members back on Earth after 193 days in space, 191 days on board the International Space Station. Meanwhile, attending to the removal of some cargo and samples brought back in the Soyuz vehicle are RSC Energia personnel and other members of the search and recovery forces. The Soyuz landing at 3:14 a.m. Central Time, 2:14 p.m. Kazakhstan time. A bullseye on-target landing for the Expedition 31 crew.